Our vision here at Swim is that every child and young person will encounter Jesus, to know him and make a choice to live for more, which is why we get really excited when we share our faith and talk about God with children and young people. So how do we start spiritual conversations with children and young people? So tip number 1 is to pray. Pray for those opportunities. We need all the help we can get, and so let's call upon the giver who helps us, the advocate. Let's pray for those opportunities, and you'll be surprised by how many opportunities are actually out there. And so remember to pray. Tip number 2 is to make it conversational. It's really great when we make it conversational because it draws children and young people in. It helps them engage and it helps them to really own their own faith. And Jesus did this all the time, and he did it by asking lots of really good questions. And so he always did this with his disciples and the people he met. He always told stories, didn't he, and parables to help people get drawn in and help them discover for themselves what it is. So how do we do this with children and young people? How can we ask good questions? So one of the places we can ask good questions is through activity. So if you see a child just drawing away, maybe you could ask them something like, why don't you draw me a place where you find most peaceful? And then once they've drawn it, you could ask them why. And maybe you could share where you find your most peace. And you can then draw the conversation to God. Or maybe quite simply, you're with young people and they're just putting on a post on Facebook or Instagram. And you could just simply ask them, what do you think are the most powerful words that have ever been spoken? So that's one place. A second place might be you're in a group setting and you want to keep it light, but you want to be provocative. And so some questions I like to ask are would you rather questions. So for example, you might want to say, would you rather be homeless or would you rather be in prison? Or would you rather be rich but worry, or would you rather be poor but content? These questions are really fun and provocative, and everybody wants to answer them and give their reasons why. And so it's a great way to just, again, draw people in. Another place to ask a good question is just to challenge them really bluntly. Sometimes we really underestimate what children and young people can handle in terms of questions. So don't be afraid to ask a question like, why do bad things happen? Or where do we get our sense of right and wrong from? They can handle it, and not only can they handle it, they absolutely love it because they don't normally get questions like this at school or at home or in their friendship group. So they love the challenge of asking these kinds of questions. You'll be surprised by how much they're willing to engage with it. Tip number 3 is to initiate. Don't be afraid to initiate. For some reason, we decide that children and young people are not very open to spiritual conversations, but that's not true at all. They really, really are. They're so hungry for it. It's just for them. They don't often have an environment where they can explore these kinds of questions and themes. They can't do that at school or at home or in their peer group. And so actually, don't be afraid to just be bold and ask these kinds of questions as we discussed. And the same applies to prayer. Say, for example, you're with a child or young person and they're sharing something that's really challenging for them. Why don't you just say, can I pray for you about that? What that communicates is that that's what you do, and that's something that's really natural, and that's something where you go to for help. And that's really great. And you'll be surprised by how many times children and young people actually say yes. And it's such an honor to be praying with children and young people, even if it's just that simple prayer. It really is great. So in summary, how do we start spiritual conversations with children and young people? Well, number 1 is to pray. Pray for and seek opportunities. Seek them earnestly. Second is to make it conversational. Ask really good questions. And thirdly, don't be afraid to initiate the conversations in prayer. So hopefully these 3 tips will help you in starting spiritual conversations with children and young people.